We're about to enter a new phase in the life of Cardano where it may actually break banks. Ready? Let's go. We're about to discuss one of those big overarching themes that affects everyone in crypto, at least everyone who wants to use fiat on ramps to interact with crypto. What the rest of the space doesn't know is that it's probably going to be especially important for Cardano, given the central role that Cardano's probably going to play, not just in crypto finance, but probably in a lot of areas of finance. Here is a very interesting thread by the wonderful Caitlin Long. You already know she is one of the architects of Wyoming's crypto adoption, crypto friendliness. It's basically the most crypto friendly jurisdiction in North America, at least, and probably has claims on having the best regulatory framework for crypto in the entire world. She's also the founder of Avanti Bank. So Avanti Bank and Kraken has a bank like this. They are what we call Wyoming Special Purpose Depository Institutions, SPDIs, or SPDIs. They were created in Wyoming because Wyoming realized early on, way before anybody else, that the regular playbook for banks wasn't going to work. They needed something brand new. So they created these SPDIs. Unfortunately, if you're going to be a crypto bank, you still need to do the fiat on-ramp thing, things like ACH and wires. And that is not something that the state of Wyoming can control. That's all controlled by the Fed. You're probably thinking to yourself, no, that's not the Fed. The Fed is that Jerome Powell guy who gets up and he announces some number and everybody gets real frothy about it and then life goes on. Turns out the Fed actually has 5 key functions. They are to conduct the nation's monetary policy, to promote the stability of the financial system, to promote the safety and soundness of individual financial institutions, to foster payment and settlement systems with safety and efficiency, and promote consumer protection. So they do these things. Monetary policy is just one of them. The Federal Reserve is, in fact, a regulator who supervises many different things, these 5 different things. The one we're going to focus on right here is fostering payment and settlement systems with safety and efficiency. So you can see right here in this PDF, these are just PDFs right off the Federal Reserve's website. So this is the Federal Reserve telling you what they do. Right here, fostering payment and settlement systems safety and efficiency. Go down here, the Federal Reserve's role in everyday transactions. They tell you, hey, we're over currency, ACH, checks, and wholesale payments. And under wholesale payments, you see Fedwire and Fedwire securities. So Fedwire and ACH and checks and currency all fall under the auspices of the Federal Reserve. You tell me if you're engaging in using some kind of fiat on-ramp to get dollars into the crypto sphere in order to interact with crypto, you tell me how you're doing it if you're not doing it by ACH or wire or check or currency. The Fed plays a role in all of these. Obviously, these Wyoming special purpose depository institutions like Avanti and Kraken's Bank in Wyoming, they're going to need to use these things like ACH. They want people to be able to use ACH with their accounts. What good is a link to the legacy financial system if you can't use ACH? So they have to make a request to the Fed to be involved in those kinds of payment systems. And they're approved by Wyoming, these banks, but they're waiting to be approved by the Fed to use things like ACH. So the Fed has proposed new guidelines for evaluating account and service requests, which you can see right here. And apparently, according to Caitlin Long's thread, they don't mention crypto at all, but obviously highly applicable to any crypto-related business that wants to be involved in things like ACH, right? So like with a lot of federal regulators, when they're going to promulgate regulations or guidelines, they first ask for public input via comments. So to the benefit of the crypto space, Avanti Bank and Caitlin Long were more than happy to oblige. Avanti submitted an 18-page PDF, which you can find on their website, but it doesn't seem like anything in there is too inconsistent with the positions that Caitlin Long and Avanti have laid out in the past. Maybe one of the best places to see a summary of that is this Forbes article that Caitlin authored back on June 24th. She basically lays out, hey, I know what you bankers are trying to do. You're trying to cram both stable coins and all other crypto assets into the existing banking framework, things like Basel III capital requirements. And she points out, this may work with stable coins for reasons we're going to get into in a second here. But with other crypto assets, things like, she points to Bitcoin and Ethereum, of course, because they're the most two widely known, but things like ADA. With things like ADA, this isn't going to work. And I think we all know that given where these blockchains, let's say the top 5 blockchains right now, given where they all are, the one that is, in my opinion, most likely to play the most central role in finance is Cardano, because Cardano isn't broken by ridiculous fees and it has smart contracts. It's basically the only play in town when you're thinking, and it's decentralized. So people will trust it because it's decentralized, unlike something like Binance Smart Chain. It's not broken by fees like Ethereum, and it actually has smart contracts, unlike Bitcoin. It's like the only play in town. The rest of the crypto space doesn't realize this yet, but I think all of us in Cardano, we already know this. So here are the reasons she points to why the existing regulatory framework won't work for coins like Cardano. So to oversimplify, a modern bank is pretty much just a balance sheet of assets and liabilities. Assets are the things they have, and liabilities are the things that they owe. And it's really not extremely cataclysmic if, on a very temporary basis, the liabilities exceed the assets and those liabilities get called due. So conceptually, at least. So if a bank doesn't have enough assets to satisfy its liabilities, this is the old fear back in the day of a bank run. Back in let's imagine the old West, before there was a Fed, and a bank has a certain number of depositors, right? They owe those depositors. Somebody comes and puts, $100 into the Tombstone Bank back in the day. And, they're also making loans. So the borrowers who took those loans, they owe that money back to the bank, but the bank owes the deposits back to the depositors. So they have assets and liabilities. So if all the depositors come in and they're like all at once and they're like, hey, we all want our deposits back, you owe us those deposits, but they don't have the money's all been lent out, right? This is like a classic bank run. They don't have enough money to pay off all the depositors. People lose confidence in the bank and the bank, could collapse. So because we have the Fed now, we have a lender of last resort. The banks, if they have some temporary shortfall of capital, they don't have enough capital to satisfy liabilities that are coming due. They can just go to the lender of last resort, the Fed. And we know the Fed can always get the money. Why can the Fed always get the money? Well, according to the FRED website, which is the Federal Reserve of St. Louis website with all the good stat graphs, you can see here a very dramatic example of that. RM2, which is kind of money in circulation, in 2016, it's 12, 13, 14 in 2018. And then we get to the pandemic. We had 15 trillion and change in circulation when the pandemic kind of hits the US. When we fast forward 1 year, we're starting to look like we have almost 20 trillion. They increased the money supply from 15 trillion and change to almost 20 trillion and change. There is no limit on the amount of money the Fed can come up with, as evidenced by this graph. They're the lender of last resort because they can print more money. In actuality, money creation is a little bit more complicated than just printing, and we've covered that in past videos. But it's sufficient to illustrate the point that the Fed, as a lender of last resort, can pretty much always cover these temporary minor shortfalls in capital that a bank might experience. Unfortunately, as soon and with stablecoins, you can sort of cram stablecoins into that same system as well, right? The stablecoins are equivalent in value to a unit of fiat, and if the Fed can print fiat, and there's no limit, obviously, by definition, on the amount of stable coins, they can always, print more fiat and acquire these stable coins. It's easy to see, though, it's a different context when we're talking about any kind of crypto beyond stable coins. Caitlin makes the point in this article that something like only 22% of Bitcoin is actually on the market. And these are coins that have hard caps. So it's not really possible. It's not really possible for the Fed necessarily to be the lender of last resort when it comes to satisfying a shortfall in cryptos that aren't stable coins. How is the Fed, with the amount of money, if let's say if Bitcoin or Cardano were to become very widely used in transactions by consumers, by institutions, by companies, it would be very easy to imagine the banks in some kind of a cataclysmic event. If we had one of these downturns, these big downturns in crypto, like we experienced after the 2017 ICO run up, when everything goes down in value, and all of a sudden, everybody wants their crypto back. They all go to the bank and they want their crypto back. If the banks are doing things like they do now, they're using a lot of leverage. And even though they might have assets like loans due to them, if everybody comes to get their Bitcoin back, or their Cardano, or their Ethereum, their Ether, the bank might be looking around like, okay, people are going to default on these loans that are due to us. That means those assets are no good, but we still have all these liabilities to our depositors. And if this were to happen over the course of a day, which it very likely could in crypto, this is the kind of thing that could happen over the course of a day. We might have a giant downturn in the market where suddenly, it becomes apparent people aren't going to pay back these loans. These loans are no good. We have to write off these loans. That means we don't have enough assets to satisfy the demands of the depositors to get their money back. Normally, the bank would just go to the Fed. But how is the Fed, if a whole bunch of banks are doing this, how is the Fed going to come up with enough crypto? Are they going to print money, go on the open markets, and try to buy enough ADA, try to buy enough Bitcoin? Maybe, but if only a small portion. We know that, what is it, something on the order of like 70 plus percent of all Cardano is locked up in staking. So they would only have access to, 30 or 20, between 25 and 30% of the market, maybe a little less, maybe a little more of Cardano. How are they possibly going to get their hands on enough of it to satisfy a bunch of banks experiencing a downturn? I mean, I'm not going to sell them my ADA. I'm going to keep hodling like a champ. Here's the part where you might argue, yeah, but they can create dollars. So they're just going to create enough dollars and pay back the dollar value of whatever crypto, the bank can't repay you. That, though, would be a forced liquidation of those crypto assets. And that's not really what you're signing up for when you give custody of your crypto to a bank like that. If you wanted that kind of relationship, maybe you just would have deposited dollars in the first place. If the bank was just going to execute a forcible liquidation anytime they screwed up and their balance sheet got out of whack. The answer that Caitlin provides in this article, and what I think is the correct answer, is that you can't really have this normal, highly leveraged framework for banking the second that cryptos beyond stablecoins are involved. You can't have leverage. Banks dealing in crypto should not have any leverage. Wyoming figured this out a long time ago. That's why special purpose depository institutions in Wyoming aren't allowed to do this fractional reserve banking stuff. They're not allowed to have leverage when it comes to the crypto assets they have in custody. They have to keep everything on a 1-to-1 ratio. They can't, they can't have way more. They can't have the situation where they don't have the assets to satisfy their depositors. Obviously, this is all exacerbated in the crypto context because when you send funds in crypto, you pretty much have absolute finality. There are exceptions, but there's a high degree of finality when you send these types of cryptos we're talking about, and settlement happens very fast. So a bank could discover a shortfall only when they do their sort of nightly reconciliation of their accounts. And if there's no lender of last resort to go to because they can't just print up more Cardano, the Fed can't print Cardano, then we've got a problem. So Caitlin Long lays out a bunch of different items that should be included sort of in the solution to all this. These are all things, obviously, that are included already in the Wyoming framework for special purpose depository institutions. But, there are things like, hey, you can't use leverage in these types of banks. It's just not going to work. These have to be non-leveraged banks. And banks do a lot of things. We've oversimplified it and only talked about loans and deposits, but banks do a lot of things with their assets. They sort of invest in a bunch of different things. And Caitlin points out you can't do that if you're holding crypto assets, because if one of your investments goes bad, it's kind of the same as having a shortfall between it's another asset. Your investments are also assets. And if you have a bunch of assets go bad and you owe crypto to your depositors, again, the lender of last resort can't print more Cardano. So the assets that the bank should be allowed to hold should only be very high quality, very liquid assets. Here she names cash, treasury bills, things like that. And she also says the risk is great enough that what we really need, we can't really have normal banks engaging in these kinds of things. We really need to ring fence special banks. This is why part of why Wyoming has these special purpose depository institutions. And they didn't just say, hey, any Wyoming bank can do this. They're special banks that have to abide by these additional requirements. She mentions other things like the need for these types of banks to revamp their operations and processes for faster settlement and irreversibility. But the real question here is whether or not the legacy system is going to recognize the need for these additional requirements, or whether all the current legacy banks are going to have their way. I mean, they want to participate in crypto. They know there's money to be made, so of course they want to participate. And the big question with these new guidelines for sort of being able to participate in the Fed's payment process systems is whether or not we'll end up with this framework where normal banks just sort of get to start engaging in crypto and might have a lot of these problems we're talking about, or whether or not the legacy system takes a more enlightened approach to this, kind of like Wyoming, and sort of has these special banks, doesn't let normal banks handle crypto, has these special banks that have to abide by these different rules as to leverage and what kinds of assets they're holding and what they're doing. Whether they sort of get to the point where they have a wholesale recognition of the fact that you don't really have a lender of last resort when it comes to some of these cryptos, because no matter how many dollars the Fed might be able to print, it's a different story when they have to then take those printed dollars and acquire these cryptos that are becoming pretty hard to acquire when they're all locked up in different things like Cardano stake pools. Hopefully the Fed will see the light on some of these things and they won't just let the banks sort of play in the crypto space as is, sort of as the Basel III regime would allow them to. Because if they do, we could actually see cryptos like Cardano breaking banks, which sounds like a good thing if you're sort of an old crypto hand. That was sort of always the goal, but it would definitely be detrimental for the legacy financial system, and it could be detrimental for crypto in terms of regulatory backlash. So this will be interesting to watch everything go down, and I will talk to you tomorrow.